conmigo aquí en el estudio se encuentra el exalcalde de Nueva York, yo lo llamo el eterno alcalde de Nueva York, Rudolph Giuliani. Mr. Mayor, welcome to Análisis 630. It's a pleasure to have you here. We've spoken over the phone, but we are very proud that you're here in the studio. Thank you very much for being here.
Enrique, it's very, very nice to be here. I always love to come to Puerto Rico. How can you not love it? It's a beautiful island and wonderful people. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you very much. Él nos acaba de decir, el alcalde de Nueva York, Rudolph Giuliani, que está con nosotros aquí, que está muy contento de estar con nosotros aquí en Puerto Rico, y dice que cómo no le va a gustar estar aquí si es una isla preciosa. Let's begin from the beginning. You were elected mayor of New York City. What were the conditions of the finances, the police, and the crime? Well,
the conditions were terrible. New York City had just been on the front cover of Time magazine, and the front cover headline was "The Rotting of the Big Apple." That's the nickname for New York City, the Big Apple. And this front cover showed all of these muggings, beatings, robberies, murders, dilapidated houses. And the whole theory of the article was that New York City was no longer a great city, that it was deteriorating, that it was ungovernable, and that it would never be the same. This was in 1992, 1993.
Mr. Mayor, crime, it's connected to the economy. You came in, and what happened?
Well, when I came in, we had just gone through 3 years in which we had averaged about 2,000 murders a year, which was a record for New York City. We had tremendous numbers of murders for 30 years, 1,500, 1,600, 1,800, but all of a sudden we went to 2,200. And our economy was in shambles. We had 10.5% unemployment. We had just lost 500,000 jobs. We had 1.1 million people on welfare. And we had a budget deficit of about $2.5 billion. So I always say that I got elected by a campaign slogan that said to the people of New York City, you can't do any worse. So why not elect me? Because even if I tried, I couldn't do such a bad job.
Mr. Mayor, how did you get about with the crime problem?
Well, my first priority was to reduce crime. I knew that if I didn't reduce crime, I couldn't save the city because nobody wanted to come to New York City. Nobody wanted to live there. So we did two things. We had a philosophy and we had a process. The philosophy was the broken windows theory, which I borrowed from two professors at Harvard, Wilson and Kelling. And that theory was that we had to start paying attention to everything. We couldn't ignore some of the small things that were getting much, much worse. The street-level drug dealing, the street-level prostitution, the aggressive panhandling where people were asking people for money, but they were really threatening them. Our neighborhoods were deteriorating from the ground up. So we had to pay attention to the small things, which we had been ignoring for about 30 years. And the small things had now become really, really big. And then our process was the CompStat program, which was a program of measuring crime every day in every precinct, and then once a week having a meeting so that we would look at our performance and we would make changes in policing immediately if we saw that we weren't being successful in reducing crime.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned in your last answer about street-level drug dealing. Did you ever, as a mayor, engage in any kind of conversation or negotiation with drug dealers?
Yeah, I once went out on the street and bought crack cocaine with DEA agents as part of an undercover operation. Not when I was the mayor, when I was the U.S. attorney, I did that. I did that to illustrate how bad the street-level drug dealing had become and how little the city, state, and federal government were doing about it. And I had done that like in 1986 while I was the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, the chief federal prosecutor.
But as a mayor, you never engaged in any kind of negotiation or conversation with drug dealers in order for them to to let you go into an area and play basketball?
No. My negotiation with drug dealers was to arrest them. I've never knew. My whole theory of what you do with drug dealers is you don't negotiate with drug dealers any more than you do with terrorists. Drug dealers, the negotiation with drug dealers should be about the amount of time they spend in prison. I mean, I'd have a negotiation with them if they'd like to spend, 20 years in prison or life. Somewhere between 20 and life would be about the right amount of time.
Mr. Mayor, you also mentioned on your last answer that you were a U.S. attorney, and at the same time, you also worked later on as mayor with the police of New York. Who do you think that should be in charge of the crime scene? In here in Puerto Rico, there is a mandate by the ex-Secretary of Justice in the year 2002, which they are no longer in power, but that the district attorney and the attorneys who represent the state are the ones who are in charge of the crime scene versus the police and the investigators. Based on your experience as U.S. attorney, U.S. District Attorney, based on your experience as mayor of the city of New York and the work that you have done with the New York City Police, who should be in charge of the crime scene?
Well, we have a different system than you do. We have a state federal system. So you have different crimes. You have state crimes, you have federal crimes. And in order to work that out, we set up task forces with the FBI, with the Drug Enforcement Administration. There's a drug task force in New York that's made up of DEA agents and New York City police officers who are partners. They work together. They investigate cases together. There's a joint terrorism task force with the FBI. They just made that arrest yesterday of a person in Brooklyn, or they made the arrest in Manhattan. It's being tried in Brooklyn, of a person who was going to bomb the Federal Reserve system. And I had the advantage, being a mayor, that I had for 12 years work with them, work with the police and work with the federal agencies, and I knew how to get them to work together. I knew how to do it when I was U.S. Attorney, so when I was mayor, I made sure that we did things together. The first plan that I was given for major drug reduction in the northern part of Brooklyn, the New York City Police Department had excluded the federal agencies from that effort. And I rejected the program and told my police commissioner to go back and come back to me in 6 months with a program that included all the federal agencies in the program. I believe that they've got to work together. The local police understand the communities. They understand the neighborhoods better than the FBI, the DEA. The FBI, DEA have better intelligence, national and international intelligence. So you want to get the benefit of both of those things. You don't want to have just one or the other. You want them working together.
Let me isolate the state side of the crime and not the federal side, and let's go even into a murder in a home. There's a murder in a home or a murder down the street, and in here, in New York, and based on your experience, who should be in charge of that murder?
A murder would be the responsibility of the New York City Police Department. Murder in America is a state crime, not a federal crime, except in very special circumstances. If you murder the president, a federal official, if you murder in the course of carrying out an organized crime activity, but mostly murder is a domestic crime. It's prosecuted, it's investigated by the police department, prosecuted by the district attorneys.
Okay, and in investigations that has to do with the state crime, then I should understand that it should be the investigators of the police, the ones who make the decision and the ones who made the investigation.
Absolutely.
They should be in charge of the crime scene.
Sure. I mean,
the crime scene.
Correct. If a murder takes place in New York City, the New York City Police Department is in charge of the crime scene. If it turns out that it's a very exceptional case and it's a federal case, like it's the murder of a federal official, then maybe the FBI would take over. But even there, if it were a murder in New York City, the New York City Police Department would pretty much control the crime scene, at least immediately.
And then the investigators will be working hand in hand with the district attorneys in pushing the case going into court.
Exactly right. And and most of the crimes in New York are state crimes, not federal crimes. So they go to the state courts. Now, if it turns out that it's organized crime, if it turns out it's terrorism, if it turns out that it's some form of organized crime, then that's different. Then the FBI, Drug Enforcement Administration, would be in charge of investigating it, and the U.S. Attorney would be in charge of prosecuting it.
Once that crime occurs and the New York City Police is in charge of that crime, murder, whatever, that it's at the state level, the investigators go ahead, the CSI people come in, they do the whole work. And when does the district attorney comes in? How does that work? How does that, and I'm sure you're going to tell me that it's a teamwork part, but how does that engage?
Well, the district attorney comes in as soon as, by and large, when an arrest is ready to be made. Although if it's a very notorious murder, the assistant district attorney will probably show up at the crime scene also. That wouldn't happen with every murder, but if it was a particularly significant murder, then the assistant district attorney will probably show up in order to observe the crime scene before there are too many changes to it. And as a prosecutor, I always had my assistant U.S. attorneys go to the scene of a crime, because and as an assistant U.S. attorney, I always did, because I thought it was necessary in order to prosecute the case properly to actually see the scene of the crime. I should understand when you mentioned that the district attorney comes in when there's an arrest to be made, then I understand that the one who controls the crime scene and the whole investigation is the city of New York, is the police of New York, right? The district attorney has no control of the investigation, has no control of the crime scene. Is that correct? The crime scene is under the control of the New York City Police Department. That's correct. The prosecutor will go, the prosecutor will observe, but
and the investigation itself?
Investigation will be handled by the police department until an arrest is made.
Right.
And then when an arrest is made, it's turned over to the district attorney for presentation to a grand jury, and then the assistant district attorney is in charge of the investigation.
Okay.
In the federal system, they work more closely together. The federal system, many of the investigations are run jointly by the U.S. attorney and the FBI or the DEA, because they have more complex investigations. They go on for a very long period of time. So they work much more closely together.
Mr. Mayor, how long did it take you to bring all this together? Because we're basically talking about a way of life. We're basically talking about a culture. I'm sure that when you got there, things were done different. But how long did it take you to do this? And the reason that I'm asking this is because I have a police superintendent right in front of you who's been on the job for 6 months. And people are very impatient in terms of results and in terms of resources also. But how long did it take you to get the results that even today, we're 20 years after 1992, 1993, you continue to see down crime in the city of New York? But how long?
2 years, I'd say. I mean, I knew it was working after the first year. I knew that the programs that we put into place, the CompStat program, the broken windows theory, the program to focus on drug crime and get drug dealers off the street. I knew it was working after the first year, but it really took 2.5 years for people to see the results, and for the results to be substantial enough so that people could feel it in their own lives.
Mr. Mayor, if you had to put on a balance or in priority, which is more important for you? Clarify a crime or the penalty for committing a crime in a law? Which one would be more important for you?
I don't know. Clarify the crime. I'm not sure I understand.
Either what if you had to put on a balance, and let me see if I can explain myself correctly. Which one has more weight, or it's more important from a crime, a resolving crime point of view? The penalty of the crime, if you murder somebody, that's going to be 20 years to go to jail, or to clarify that murder? Which one of the two would have a bigger impact to to deter crime out there?
Both do. I mean, you can't punish until you find the criminal and arrest the criminal. So the finding of the criminal, the arresting of the criminal, the accusation is very, very important, because you can't get to the punishment. But the punishment then becomes important because if you have a lot of crime, which we did in New York City, what New York City was doing for 30 years is just rearresting the same criminals. So people would get arrested for theft, and within 2 months they'd be back out on the street stealing again. Then we'd arrest them a year later, then they'd be back out in 3 months. So what we did was we focused on career criminals. We passed a law called 3 strikes and you're out. I tried to get the judges to understand that all we were doing is reprocessing the same criminals right back to the street. And if you just put them in jail for a long period of time, our crime would start going down. Certain criminals are crime machines. The longer they're out on the street, the more crimes they commit. The longer you have them in jail, the less crimes they commit. It's as simple as that. So both are, there's no way to say which is more important. You got to catch the criminal, otherwise you can't punish him. But once you catch him, then you got to put him in jail for a long time, because otherwise they just go out and keep repeating the same crimes. It also becomes very difficult for the police. They lose enthusiasm. They lose commitment when they're constantly arresting the same people, and then these people are committing crimes.
You mentioned, we were talking about the crime scene, about who takes control, and basically in Puerto Rico there's an MOU in which the ADA, the Assistant District Attorney, is the one in charge of the crime scene, and once that happens, they get all the control and they get everything done. The investigators are basically working for the ADA.
Well, that wouldn't be the way it happened. Certainly in New York, and I think in most of the states, generally the police are in charge of the crime scene, and the ADA becomes the person in charge of the case once you're about to make an arrest. But until then, the police carry out the investigation. Now, in New York City, our homicide division, I personally think it's the best in the world. And why is it the best in the world? Because we have so many murders, right? So they have tremendous experience. Even the FBI, for a murder investigation, would very often call upon our homicide detectives, because homicide detectives in New York have more experience investigating murder than the FBI would have in investigating murder. So you want your best people running, you want your most experienced people running a crime scene, particularly nowadays with all of the intricacy of the forensic tests that have to be done, the DNA that has to be, the fingerprints, the hair, the location of where things are, so that the forensic experts can recreate it. You really want experts in charge of this. And I mean, if I were the district attorney or the U.S. attorney, I would want the police or the FBI or the Drug Enforcement Administration in charge of the crime scene. I'd want my assistant U.S. attorney there to observe, but I'd want them calling the shots. I mean, because they're the real experts.
Mr. Mayor, when you were talking about the subject on rearresting these criminals, and you mentioned that one of the things that you also did is that you had conversations with the judges, so that they could understand the work that you were doing with the city of New York, the work that the police was doing, in order to put these people back into jail, because these guys are professionals. These people live and die into robbing, attacking, and committing crimes, and it was like a little machine. They would go through the system, go out, go through the system, go out, which is something very similar to what we see here in Puerto Rico. We see a lot of offenders go through the state system, not the federal, through the state system, and they are out there the following day or within a week committing the same crime.
Well, here's what I did when I was U.S. attorney. Drug crime is both a state and a federal crime. So what I did was, as soon as I became U.S. attorney, I used the Drug Enforcement Administration to go to certain areas of New York City, in particular the Lower East Side, where they were selling drugs on the street, and I arrested these people and brought them into federal court, took them away from the state court. And in the federal court, they were often held without bail. The sentences were 3 and 4 times as heavy. And then the New York City Police Commissioner at the time, Ben Ward, decided that he would work with me. So now I not only had the DEA out there arresting people and bringing them into federal court, I had the police out there arresting them and bringing them into federal court. And what we found right away was they were going to jail for much longer periods of time when we took them into federal court than they were into state court. It even got a name. It was called Federal Day. We'd pick one day a week, we'd go into a big drug-infested area, and we'd arrest everybody and bring them into federal court that day. And you know what would happen? Sometimes drug dealers would offer bribes to come back and arrest me tomorrow. The police officer or the DEA agent or the FBI agent would be there, make the arrest, and he'd say, "Am I going to federal court?" And they'd say, "You're going to federal court, pal." And he'd say, "I'll give you $1,000 if you come back and arrest me tomorrow so I can go to state court."
Mr. Mayor, just recently, the numbers on the homicide up to date came out here in Puerto Rico. Homicide rate is down 22% versus last year. How do you convey to the residents, and this goes back to one of my previous questions about people having, being desperate for this crime situation to be resolved. How do you convey to the residents that reducing crime takes patience, persistence, and cooperation?
Well, I mean, you have to educate people about that because they expect results immediately. If you have a long-standing crime problem, let's say murder,
which we had.
So New York City had that from, I may have the dates a little bit wrong now because it's a few years ago, but from about 1967 until 1993, we had at least 1,500 murders every year. Many years we had 1,800 and 1,900, and then a couple of years we had over 2,000. So this was a persistent, long-term, massive number of murders that went on in New York City, and nobody really did anything about it. So the first year, our reduction in murder, maybe it was 15%, maybe it was 18%, something like that, 15, 18%. I knew that it was working. I knew that our approach was working when I saw a double digit, I don't remember if it was 15, it could have been 20, but nobody believed it. After the first 15, 20%, nobody believed. So what your murder reduction tells me, and if I understand your statistics correctly, that's a reduction from last year when you had a tremendous number of murders, but it's also a slight reduction from the year before that. So that's a good trend. I mean, that shows that you're starting to move in the right direction. Now, people are not going to believe that until you follow it up next year with somewhere between a 10 and a 20% reduction next year, and then a 15 and 20% reduction a year after, and then. But from the point of view of the police, you should develop a lot of enthusiasm from that. It shows that things are starting to work. 22% is, no matter what things were like last year, 22% reduction from one year to another is a very big reduction. That's probably the biggest reduction we ever had in any one particular year. Now, we did it for 8 consecutive years. So ultimately the reduction in murder was 65%. New York City continued to do it under Mayor Bloomberg and Commissioner Kelly. The reduction now is about 80%. So, but that first year at 15 to 20%, nobody really noticed it.
I want to move now into the national arena because we have a few minutes left, and the election and also the debate that happened this week. But since I am a Hispanic, and Hispanics have been very important in this election with the state of Florida also, mainly Orlando area, Miami, and all that. The last debate is going to be in Boca Raton. How do you see the role of Hispanics, not only in the election, but also in the Republican Party?
Well, you know, I got elected mayor of New York City, and each time I got elected, I got a higher percentage of the Hispanic vote. The first time I ran, I lost. Probably had about 36% of the Hispanic vote, which is what Republicans traditionally get. Second time I ran, I won by 3%, and I got 42% of the Hispanic vote. Third time I ran, I won by 18%, and I had almost 50% of the Hispanic vote. So my Hispanic vote went up, you know, dramatically during the time that I was mayor, and I was a Republican, so that was hard to do. Same thing is true with President Bush, by the way. President Bush got elected governor of Texas. First time he had certain Hispanic votes. Second time he had over 50%. And President Bush, when he ran, was getting close to 50% of the Hispanic vote. Maybe 45%, 42, 45%. The Hispanic vote is enormously important in this election. And it's not just Florida. It's Florida, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico. I mean, these are states that can be heavily influenced by the Hispanic vote. And Romney has to get, I would say, to about 40% to win those states. If he can get 40% of the Hispanic vote, 40, 42, 43, then the states I just mentioned will be states he'll win by 4 or 5%. If he stays down in the numbers McCain was at, then he's probably not going to win. McCain was in the 30s. He's got to get into the 40s. Doesn't have to get 50. He's got to get into the 40s. And I think he can do it, but it's difficult because of the immigration issue. I mean, that's the Republican Party was doing really, really well, developing a strong Hispanic base in the Republican Party until the big immigration debates of 2006, 2007. And President Bush tried very hard to do immigration reform. That would have been a sensible way to handle immigration. And Republicans blocked it. A lot of Republicans said a lot of harsh things about immigration. And I think they're trying to work their way out of it now. They were trying to work their way out of the hole that was created by making many of those harsh remarks. I wish to add one other thing.
Go ahead.
The ironic thing about it is that President Obama, who got a big proportion of the Hispanic vote last time, had 2 years to pass comprehensive immigration reform. He had a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, veto-proof majority in the Senate, and he didn't pass it. He passed a lot of other things, but he didn't pass immigration reform like he promised the Hispanic community. If he's reelected, he will not be able to pass comprehensive immigration reform because the Republicans in the House of Representatives will block it. If Romney is elected, he will be able to pass it. He'll be able to pass it because he believes in it. He'll be able to pass it because he will be able to persuade the Republicans in the House. Unlike a Democratic president, he'll be able to persuade the Republicans in the House that they should pass this for their long-term future, for the long-term future of the Republican Party, because the Republican Party should have at least half the Hispanic community Republicans, because they agree with the Republican Party. At least half the community does, if not more. It's this immigration thing that's holding them back. So the real irony here is Obama had his chance to do immigration reform to help the Hispanic community. When he had a Democratic House and Senate, he failed to do it. He didn't keep his promise. And Romney will get his chance to do it, and he'll be able, I call it like Nixon going to China. I mean, he'll be able to do it because the Republicans in the House are going to have to give a Republican president what he wants, particularly in his first year in office.
In order to finish, I have about a couple of minutes. I'm sure that you have read about the things that Governor Fortuño has done here in his first close to 4 years. How do you see things in Puerto Rico under the leadership of Governor Fortuño?
I think he's been one of the best governors in the United States. I think he's done a lot of the very difficult things that are necessary to straighten out an economy, reducing expenditures, actually reducing it. My goodness, if President Obama were able to do that, maybe our national economy would be doing well. He's been able to keep taxes low. He's got a growth rate now of about 1.2%. Growth rate was minus 4%. That's a tremendous change in a short period of time. It shows that his programs are working. You've added about 30,000 jobs in the last 14 months. That means you're moving in the right direction. The governor took over a very difficult situation, kind of like President Obama took over a very difficult situation. The difference is Governor Fortunio improved the situation and has you moving in the right direction. You've got crime going down, you have jobs going up, you have the growth rate of the economy up about 20% over what it was. President Obama took over a bad situation, and now it's catastrophic. So, I mean, this is you get reelected. I took over a very bad situation in New York City. I improved it. Well, that's what Governor Fortunio did. He took over a very bad situation. Crime is starting to go down. Jobs are starting to go up. Your growth rate is starting to improve. These are the things that happen when you have good policies in place. And I think given the difficulties he's faced, I think he's done a very good job.
Rudolph Giuliani, thank you very much for being here in Analisis 630.
Thank you very much for having me. I feel like I was the mayor of one of the biggest Puerto Rican cities in the world, New York. Always loved interacting and being a part of the Puerto Rican community in New York, so it's always a pleasure for me to come here.